Hello friends and gamers, and welcome to the Fortress. My name is Jinx, and today we're looking at the campaign medals for the USA for Global War 1936 version 3 for the tournament of the Spring Offensive 2021. The campaign ribbons are a series of 3 ribbons attached on the bar on your chest that will symbolize which campaign or which tournament you attended, what accomplishments you got within that game, using a kind of a victory point system designed for the tournament, and also which nation you played, if your side won first or second or third place, using the in-game designed by historical board gaming rules with their victory points, as well as an oak leaf attachment to symbolize if you played more than one major power. So there should be some recognition for that as well. If you have 3 allied players, you're sharing one as the Brits and you're an American player, and 2 of them call in sick, well, it should be recognized your accomplishment of still winning, or still at least playing. Like, you may have lost, but you played all 3 sides, and so sometimes that's pretty difficult. Not all 3 sides, but all 3 allied players, right? So that's the idea there. These campaign medals deal more with the prestige ribbon and the prestige stars. So the prestige ribbon shows how many prestigious accomplishments the player achieved within the game by attaching prestige stars. A 1-tier star is usually attainable. A 2-tier star is a job well done. A tier 3 star is exceptional work, and a tier 4 star is a rare and outstanding achievement. The way you get these stars is you fill one of 3 objectives in each tier, and you don't have to go for all 3. Some of them will be harder, some of them will be easier in your game, so you go for one of them and you get a star in that category. If you happen to skip a star, if you skip tier 1 and just get a tier 2 star and a tier 3 star, you don't automatically get 3 stars. Just because it's tier 3 doesn't mean you get 3 stars, you still only get 2 stars in that case. So this video will mostly deal with the prestige ribbons and the tier system and what it's all about, right? But keep in mind too that some of them will seem less attainable than others. Some of them will seem difficult, but for the most part, I'm trying to steer the player down a historical pathway. I'd like to thank my contributors and feedback people, my bug fixers and pointer outers, Adelwolf, Liam Barowski, Madman Dan, and Trig. I really appreciate you guys' thoughts and feedback and your suggestions too, and I've incorporated a bunch of them throughout all this, and it really has been amazing to have you guys check this in with me. I really do appreciate it. So let's dive right into the tier system and see what it's all about. So the Alcan Highway. Gain a prestige star if, at any point during the game, the USA can trace a railway line from a USA major factory to an Alaskan land zone, or to the Alaska land zone. So the USA has a major factory all throughout the United States, and they're connected by railway, and so America's goal on this tier is to attach this railway line to Alaska over here. There's 2 ways of doing that. One is a historical route going between British Columbia, Yukon, and up here. Of course, that will cost the Allies a little bit because they have to build a railway link right here, costing 4 IPP. But the other one would be paid by the Americans up here, and so that's not too bad. So you could do it that way, or you could do a little bit more alt history and make the railway line go here through southeast Alaska to British Columbia. And there, in that case, the Americans would have to pay for one railway link here and another railway link here, costing $8, but they could get this tier 1 in this case. Coincidentally, I live right about there, and mile 0 on the Alaskan Highway is right there, and so it's within a 45-minute drive, and I've been there multiple times. Never took a picture of it, but been there multiple times. So that's one way of doing things. For easy tier 1, guaranteed, you got it in your pocket, you've got it at any point in the game, and you guaranteed you have it, right? Some of the other ones are less easy to guarantee, so this one's nice. Not too much else to be said about this. It can be a waste of money as well. By making this highway here and never having Alaska threatened, well, you might lose out a little bit, but it's one way of diverting resources and making it kind of worth your time, right? Like, you got a star out of that, you kind of handicapping yourself a little bit by diverting $8 of resources into something else to just get the star, so that's worth noting as well. So that's the idea there. The next one we have up is I Have Returned, spoken by General MacArthur as he walked onto the shores of the Philippines. Well, something along those lines in a speech he gave to the Filipino people. Get a prestige star if, at any point during the game, the USA regained control of the Philippine land zone. That land zone is right here. Now, the Philippines is worth $2, but it's also worth an additional $2 to the Japanese. So that is a nice bit of cash that they get out of there. If they invade and capture that, that's, $4 of income, and it's mountainous and island territory. So the Japanese could theoretically hold on to that territory for a while by building militia. So it's a worthy goal to take. Now, most games, if America's doing well, it does recover Philippine. I've seen anyways. And so that's something that you'll probably end up seeing quite a bit as well. Worth noting. All right, and so that's the goal, but sometimes it's too hard, so that's why you have these other alternatives that you might want to put it in the bag. The Alcan Highway starts to look a little easier if the Philippine is stacked up with enemy troops. And of course, if Japan ever invades the Philippine, you might not have access to this one anyways. The Mark 14 torpedo is an addition by, I believe, either Liam or Madman Dan. I can't remember exactly. Gain a prestige star if, at any point during the game, the USA rolls 3 or more submarine convoy raiding rolls, and at least 3 rolls do not succeed in removing enemy IPP. This one might actually be too difficult. Japan has 2 convoy lines right here and here, but that means that it has to actually has to do 3 convoy rolls and miss on all 3, or more than 3 and miss on at least 3. That might be difficult because America starts with, well, all submarines raiding convoy lines, they get a +2. So for it not to remove anything, you have to really be underdiced in that sense. So I do have an alternative backup that is basically by maxing out all these, you would win an achievement, War Under the Sea, which would be a tier 1. And in that case, Britain could help by attacking convoy lines here. America could kind of finish them off here. And if you max them out at all out 5 and 5, you would get that tier 1 objective. Again, it's not balanced, so you get all 3 of these. The Mark 14 might be too difficult, so you might want to go for the Alcan Highway, or might want to do this one instead. Okay, so moving on to tier 2. Race to Rome. Gain a prestige star if, at the end of the game, the USA controls the Italian city Rome land zone. I feel like that's a little bit hard to say. But the Rome land zone is right here. And so to capture the Rome land zone, it's a mountainous territory. I mean, it's not fully mountainous, actually, because, well, I believe it's not fully mountainous because the roundel is firmly in place here in the plains. So I think if you're attacking from C-Zone 151, it's quite a bit harder. But if you're attacking from C-Zone 50, from the south here, you would only have, I don't think you'd suffer any penalties to mountains, right? But oftentimes, the Italian player might fortify Rome and make it much more difficult. Of course, Rome could also be surrounded, but in that case, you have to damage their ports as well to make it work in that case, right? Or at least blockade them. Blockade or damage, I can't quite remember, but you get the idea. If they have an airfield, which they don't, but you get the picture. I think maybe to blockade them, then they could reduce the defensive value by 1, so that might be an option. But it's not quite a mountainous area. I think the way the rules define it is if the roundel is 100% in mountains, then it's a mountain terrain. And in the case of Rome, it's only it's in the plains. So if you're attacking from this direction, you shouldn't have to suffer the mountains. So it's difficult. It's almost tier 3, depending on what the Italians do, but it's still doable. Pacific Forward Base. Gain a prestige star if, once USA peacetime income is at least 35, at the end of every USA turn until at war with a major power. The USA has the at least following units in C-Zone 68, I need to correct that, off the coast of the Hawaiian Islands, 1 battleship and 2 other surface warships of any type. This could also include battleships, or it could include a carrier if you want to. And that would be placed in Hawaii. So let's take a look. So this is C-Zone 68. So that means that USA has to have, once it's at income of 35, it has to have a capital ship and 2 other warships of any kind here. That means that the Japanese could do a Pearl Harbor attack here. Now, USA, usually what happens in our games anyways, is if you're playing by the base rules, USA doesn't need to sit here and wait. Because Japan is usually anticipating its surprise strike from a place somewhere here in Caroline Islands or Marshall Islands. By Caroline Islands, you have this port, whereas Marshall, you don't. And so you're sitting here at Caroline Islands, and you can move 4 spaces on the turn, 4 or 5 spaces, depending on what you're moving, on the turn you declare war, or use a surprise attack. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and theoretically 5. But what USA can often do is move their entire fleet from San Francisco. This is where they start, in San Francisco. They can move them up to here, which is what I've done successfully in the past to avoid the enemy. And then, of course, you could rapidly start building ships as well. So I wanted to incentivize the Americans to come out here just for that tier 2 objective, because you want to get that tier 2 star, and this kind of shifts things in a historical way, and yes, you do sacrifice something to get that tier 2 star, but it's just the way it is. So in that case, you'd have to park a battleship as well as 2 other ships of any kind here to make that happen. Now, the Japanese have their own incentive. Actually, no, they don't have their own incentive to grab this, I believe. Yeah, they have their incentive for winning a battle and taking off more enemy capital ships than they lost themselves, so there's that. But apart from that, there's nothing specifically targeting Hawaiian Islands, so that's worth noting. Lastly, we have Operation Overlord. Gain a prestige star if, at any point during the game, while all French home country, barring southern France, is enemy-controlled, the USA gains control of one of the 2 following land zones and keeps its units present in land zone for a full game turn, from the end of the USA turn to the end of the following USA turn, Normandy and Picardy. That is up here, Normandy or Picardy. It's basically representing the D-Day landings. So all French land zones have to be in enemy control, barring southern France, which means just these 3 territories. Well, I guess all 5 of these territories at the end of the day. And then the Americans come and capture one of those 2 territories and hold on to it for a full game turn. That's a worthy tier 2, or sorry, is it tier 2 or tier 3 difficulty? Tier 2 difficulty. You have to grab onto it and hold on to it for 1 game turn. It can be difficult as well, so you might have to wait until later on in the game to do it, but it might be doable as well. Now, of course, given different, like each game is a little bit different. You might have a game where the Axis are at peace with the common turn the entire game, so you might not have an opportunity to land, and so in that case you might want to go for one of these other ones instead. That makes this one appeal a little bit more, because the time window might close on that one. So you might think initially, well, I might not want to lose a battleship and 2 other surface warships to the Japanese. I might want to go for this Rome, or I might want to go for this one. But you don't know how the end of the game is going to look, so sometimes it's worthwhile grabbing the early ones, just because the other ones might not be accessible. So in this one, if you knew how the outcome is going to be, that it's going to be kind of a historical game, then yeah, you might want to just simply go for Operation Overlord. But because you don't know how the game is going to end up, you might end up wanting to do this Pacific forward base and lose your battleship and 2 other surface warships to the Japanese, and thereby, thereby guaranteeing a tier 2 star. I should quickly comment too that this race to Rome, so the British will have something equivalent where they will end the game holding on to Rome land zone to get their tier 2 or tier 3, I can't recall. And by doing that, they would get their 3rd star. And so it's going to be a race between the British and the USA. So that's worth noting as well. You might not want, there'll be some inter-allied competition going on there. So you might think, okay, I'm going to pass on the forward base. And then you might think your goal might be set on Rome, but then the British grab Rome, and so you say, well, shoot, Operation Overlord is my only option. So in that case, you might be regretful for not having given the Japanese the forward base option right here as well. So that's the idea there, is you have to do one of these ones, but some of them might close. The window of opportunity might close on some of them. So you have to grab one of these 2 territories and hold on to it for full turn. And it has to be the USA that grabs it. And it has to be USA too that initially launches that attack, because the rest of French territory has to be enemy controlled. Next up, we have a tier 3, which is the island hopping campaign. Now, this one is mirrored to the Japanese one, but let's go over it. Gain a prestige star if, at the end of the game, the USA or a member of its alliance or a neutral nation control all or most of the following land zones, except for 2. All land zones with USA printed roundel across the whole map. All Japanese islands barring Japanese home country and the islands north of Japan, Sakhalin and Kuril Islands. This should say South Sakhalin, but nonetheless. Gilbert Islands, Solomon Islands, Fiji and New Hebrides, New Britain, New Guinea, and Dutch New Guinea. So we go over to the Pacific side. So here we have South Sakhalin and Kuril Islands, and so these are not included. Neither are the home countries included, but included are places like Okinawa, Formosa, Volcano Islands, Bonin Islands. You have to hold on to Mariana as well, and the Palau is the Philippines because it's got your roundel. You have to hold on to the Carolines. You have to hold on to these ones, Dutch New Guinea, and New Britain. Solomon Islands, I believe, are there, as well as Fiji, and I think New Hebrides. Yeah, and Gilbert is the last one. There's also going to be Samoa, of course, because it's got your roundel. Gilbert, as well as the historical Wake, Midway, and of course, there's Ato and Kiska Islands up here as well. Now, the Japanese have something similar where they're targeting a few of these ones as well. They're targeting Ato and Kiska as well as all these other ones down here that we just underlined. Those want to be controlled by Japan. Gilbert, Marshall, Caroline, of course, I forgot to mark this one in here, Caroline, and so the Japanese are striving for the same goals that the USA are striving. The difference is, the reason that there's going to be some back and forth between the two is that Japan has to capture this at any point in the game, and USA has to end the game holding on to this stuff. So that changes things quite a bit. It means that there's going to be some transfer of power. Japan might simply land its forces there and then withdraw, and then USA might simply, then USA just simply has to capture it. But Japan might want to hold on to at least some of the territories to prevent the Allies from grabbing it and getting their Tier 2 or Tier 3 star. So there'll be some conflict back and forth as they fight over these things and try to make it work out. My fear is that Japan will simply grab these territories and then withdraw its troops right behind itself, and then America will have to come in behind and clean up without any conflict. So maybe there should have been something like a Tier 3 for Japan to hold on to these at the end of the game, which makes it really difficult. So instead I made it Japan grabs onto these territories at some point during the game, and America has to end the game holding on to these territories for their Tier 3. So there will be some back and forth, and it's up to Japan if it wants to try to deny the Americans their island hopping campaign victory or Tier 3 star or not. Next up we have the Central European Campaign. Gain a prestige star if, at the end of the game, the USA or a member of its alliance or a neutral nation control all or most of the following land zones, 2 of the land zones being excluded: all French home country, all Great Britain's home country and Gibraltar, Portugal, Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, Bavaria, and Western Germany. So keep in mind that it could be in neutral nation control. It doesn't mean that USA has to capture Portugal or Belgium or Netherlands or Denmark. So the idea behind this one is that it's a stepping stone to kind of a final victory at the end of the game. So that's Denmark here, Netherlands, Belgium, all French home country. So maybe I'll just paint it out like this. All French home country. What else? Gibraltar and Portugal. So yeah, you have to make sure you grab this back from the Italians if they grab it, and this back from the Axis if they happen to grab it, or the Russians if they happen to grab it. The reason being too is because Portugal is on the western side of Europe, and it has a close relationship, not super close, but it's closer to USA. There might be some extradition laws in Spain as well as Portugal, but also Portugal is important because Britain and Portugal have a long-lasting alliance, so it's definitely westward leaning quite a bit. The USA or one of its allies have to also grab Bavaria and Western Germany, which is right here rather. So I should probably undo. Yeah. So the line would look like something like this, as well as Gibraltar and Portugal. There. The idea is this is roughly the lines that the World War II ended with America holding on to these territories and the Russians taking out Berlin. So that's to kind of get you a nice solid Tier 3 accomplishment at the game. Like, Tier 3 star is really good. Ending the game with Tier 3 is your side is probably winning or has won. You've done fantastic work, and so this is a major feather in your cap. It's also a stepping stone to Tier 4, where the Tier 4 will add some territories to a Tier 3 category. That's the idea there. Okay, next, for last Tier 3, we have basically the Kuomintang Communist Civil War, where the KMT control all or most of the KMT home country, except for 4. Let's take a quick look what that all entails. So the KMT home country is everything, it's all of Manchuria, which is all up here, all of the warlords, which is all down here, as well as Yunnan, and as well as these islands here, and maybe Formosa as well, if memory serves. I think that's what it is. And so to win this, you have to hold everything barring 4. Now, Hong Kong, I can't remember if that counts or not. I feel like it does count, that it is already partially included in that, but I have to look at the KMT reference sheet to see what it actually says. But so 4 territories can be difficult to hold on to. My thinking is if Japan wants to be stubborn, they can hold on to Formosa. They could hold on to Hainan because both of those are mountainous territory, I believe. And then also it has to make exception because what if the USSR comes swinging into here, grabbing territory up? So there has to be an exception of 4. So let's assume Formosa is still enemy held and 3 territories up here fall to the Russians. That doesn't leave lots of wiggle room as well. So that's why I have it at 4 for a nice tidy tier 3 victory where the communists didn't end up winning and as historical and the KMT did. Now this one, if need be, I could always pull this out and replace it with another tier 3 for USA, more specific to the USA. But I thought this one kind of worked nicely because it incentivizes the Americans to also feed resources into the KMT and hopefully they win that fight. And even if they don't, it means that the Americans might actually make some landing. Like say if the CCP are too powerful here, then the Americans are incentivized to go after the CCP and start to push them back instead of just completely neglecting it. So how do they balance against each other? Well, island hopping campaign is a sure thing to do, right? You can probably achieve this one, and so it's a historical path. Central European is a little bit harder because you're going against, more IPP territories, more industrialized areas. You're going into German heartland as opposed to just islands with very little money. So you're likely going to grab the island hopping campaign. But the Central European campaign is also a major feather in your cap as well. And lastly, the Comintern Communist Civil War. That's also quite beneficial to win too because it removes a couple victory points, at least 1 victory point from the Russians. So this is worth looking at in this case. So I think it's fairly balanced where everything is of equal importance, and both of them are actually quite historical. These top 2 anyways. So, but if the Axis are too strong in Europe, you might not go for this one. So you might want to go for the islands, and if the islands are holding out, say if the Philippines and 2 other territories are holding out solidly, you might start looking with more interest at the Comintern Communist Civil War to try to help them out, especially if they're doing well. So yeah, it is harder to get these ones for sure because they are tier 3. Moving on to tier 4. Fight for Democracy. New renaming by Edelwolf, I think, suggested the rename instead of Liberty for Europe. So Fight for Democracy was a new one. Gain a prestige star if, at the end of the game, the USA or a member of its alliance or a neutral nation control all or most of the following land zones, except for 5. All French home country, barring southern France. This is because Roosevelt acknowledged Vichy France as its own government, so that's why barring southern France. All of Germany, Great Britain's home country and Gibraltar, Portugal, Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, and Yugoslavia. All land zones of Norway, all land zones of Sweden, all land zones of Greek, Berlin, Bavaria, Western Germany, Rome, Sicily, and Northern Italy. So that is a bit more territory. Now the exception, of course, is 5, so that is a bit bigger. And it's to include in case Italy doesn't go into war until a later stage, because sometimes that occurs. So you would have an exception of 3. Normally you'd have to grab Sicily, which would be Operation, what was this one called, Husky, and Rome and Northern Italy, right? You'd have to grab these 2 territories. You'd also have to grab Yugoslavia. I believe it's Yugoslavia. Yeah, but not Albania. These territories here. But you would be surrendering, a lot of other territories. You'd be surrendering all that to potentially the Russians at that point. They'd probably come in and fill the vacuum. And then you would grab these territories or make sure these territories are not held by Axis or Comintern. And then you see at this point, it's very much dominated in Europe to make sure that the democratic nations survive and thrive. Now, Russians still could have a nice piece of this, and they could still achieve their tier 3 victory by holding on to this stuff. But they won't achieve their tier 4. And a major difference, of course, is Berlin is now in Allied hands. Now, there is an exception of 5, so theoretically, you could surrender all of Scandinavia to the USSR and still get your tier 4. But you'd have to hold on to Berlin and Yugoslavia and these territories as well, kind of cutting off the Russians from their ports or from any Mediterranean connection, except for Turkey, of course. There's also Portugal isn't included, and in this case of excluding 5 of the Scandinavian countries, you would have to make sure they've captured Berlin, Bavaria, Western Germany, Rome, Sicily, and Northern Italy. So it would change things up a little bit. You give up these 5, but you have to make sure you have these ones. So if Italy stays out of the war, then yeah, you'd have to surrender those 3 territories, but you'd have to make sure that the Russians haven't grabbed Scandinavia as well, or at least part of Scandinavia. So that's one of their tier 4s. The other tier 4 is Operation Downfall. Now this one I'm still a little bit mixed over because I might need to adjust it a bit. Gain a prestige star if at the end of the game, the USA completes one of the two following objectives. The USA control 2 home country land zones of Japan, which I like, is good. All Japanese home country ports are blockaded, and each factory of any type and each major shipyard in Japanese home country land zones has at least 5 damage markers. This one's difficult to balance out. So first of all, you'd have to capture 2 land zones. Now, the reason there's 2 is because Japan is notoriously difficult to capture. They get a +1 bonus on any, infantry class defending in Japan, and they also get their militia that only cost $1 for a militia in any of their home country. So they could rapidly reinforce each and every turn, and plus they can move within the insides here too. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. For $7, they could build 7 militia that are all defending at 3 in mountains. So you could really defend quite handily. So America has 2 options. One of them is capture 2 home country and end the game with 2 home country. And the other one is you have to damage every major shipyard. So the major shipyards are 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, you have to get 5 damage on them. And to top that off, every factory of any type has to have at least 5 damage as well. So usually Japan will have 2. They'll have 1 in Tokyo and 1 in Kyushu, and they might build another one. So that's 3 factories. So you have to damage 5 facilities for 6 or 7 facilities for 5 damage. That's pretty difficult to do, especially with some Japanese income coming up each turn to repair damage as well. So you won't have a lot as Japan, but say if they hold on to their home country here and they're blockaded, so they might get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They might pour $7 into just fixing a few of the damages, so to force an extra strategic bombing on everything. So say you have $7 and all these have at least 5 damage on them. Well, Japan might sink $1 into each one as well, just to keep them above that 5 mark, and force the Americans for another round of strategic bombing, and another round of potentially being hit at the anti-aircraft rates of 3, I believe it is, for all that. So it is a bit of a challenge now, but still that one might need a little bit more adjusting and playtesting to figure out, because it is quite difficult. Now, I know Operation Downfall is the historical one, and so it was a little easier before. You just had to damage their factories, and now it's a little bit more difficult. But at the end of the day, this is still worthy Tier 4, and I think it's right on the cusp, because the way I'm designing this is Tier 3, I want everybody to have an accessible Tier 3. In America, I would consider in World War II achieved Tier 3 star, in their victory, but they're right on the border of Tier 4, where they might have actually crossed the border, and so some of this stuff just almost crosses on. All they have to do really in Fight for Democracy is hold on to Berlin, and now they've achieved like a Tier 4 victory. Or Operation Downfall. Like realistically, if America had grabbed all of Berlin and kind of invaded, instead of like holding back and grabbing Bavaria and such, if they had grabbed Berlin, it might have changed the outcome really quite a bit, because Berlin was a major feather in the cap for the Russians. Operation Downfall is quite doable still, but it's much more difficult than the first draft. Okay, before we conclude and wrap things up, I want to show you the alternatives for Tier 1. There's 2. War under the Pacific. All Japanese convoy lines have been rated to the maximum amount at the end of the USA turn. War Plan Indigo. Basically, USA, once at war, has to have 2 infantry class units in Iceland. So both are interesting options for Tier 1. One of them ties up forces sitting in Iceland, which is it's not much forces, just 2 infantry, it's not too much, but those are forces that you might want to use elsewhere instead. So it ties up, $6 just sitting there at the end of the game. The other option is damaging or raiding Japanese convoy lines to the maximum amount, and that could be a little bit harder to do. Japanese convoy lines are right near Japanese shorelines for the most part. There's always a nearby island where they can park their fleet off of and really protect. So you have this one here, this convoy line. Well, you could raid it from, or protect it from Japan. You could protect it from Volcano Island, Okinawa over here, Formosa. The only one that's a little bit out there is down south here, Hainan, and over here. But you would need to hit this one as well, which is right on the border of a lot of Japanese territory. Just something in Korea will cover both sides each and every turn. So that one's decently hard. And so tier 3, tier 2, I don't really know. Well, sorry, it's not tier 3. It might be a tier 2 difficulty, actually, just because it is sufficiently severe, and so I need a good tier 1. So let me quickly scroll up to this stuff here. So an optional change for this Mark 14 torpedo, the USA rules, a person can say 2 or more submarine convoy rating rolls, and at least 2 do not succeed in removing enemy IPP. And this is not specific to the Japanese, but it is, the Axis convoy lines are either in the Baltic Sea or the Mediterranean for 1, Baltic Sea for 3, or Japanese for 10, right? So it's most likely going to be the Japanese. But it is doable to do them on the other ones too, in the Mediterranean as well. So maybe I need to adjust this from, instead of 3, say 2 or more convoy rating rolls, and at least 2 do not succeed in removing enemy IPP, and that might make this a nice tier 1. It also, I like this one because players are going to want to maximize, they're not going to want to miss out on things, right? And so here we have, I still am leading and encouraging the player to go into the Alcan Highway as that sure way of getting it, instead of waiting on the convoy rolls to miss out. So that's the idea there. But let me know if I should switch out Mark 14 torpedo with War under the Pacific, where Japanese convoy lines are rated to the maximum. That might be difficult. Maybe it's rated to 8 IPP. That still might be very difficult. If it is 8 IPP, that would be the equivalent of the Germans, where the Germans were rating the Atlantic convoy lines, and their thing is they have to get 8 IPP, but it's a lot easier to rate these convoy lines, I think, on some level, because this one's worth 5, this one's 6, this one 3, and another 6 over here, whereas Japan only has 10. But you're not going for 10, you're going to just max them out, so you are going for 10, but you get the idea. The goal line is a little different. Excellent, so that is it. Thank you all for your thoughts. Please leave comments and such. I will definitely read them. I think this will be roughly the final draft for this, and the rest I might do a more professional cut with actual artwork and such included over here. Thank you all. Cheers.